You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Sean Wilkie, and along with my awesome co host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, please go ahead and introduce today's guest.
I'm Zach, and I'm excited to introduce a colleague of mine, Dr. Ryan Appleby. Dr. Ryan is a co founder of OB Veterinary Education, an online continuous education platform which focuses on delivering high quality veterinary education in short, manageable segments. He is a boarded radiologist and faculty member at the Ontario Veterinary College, where his research and academic work focus on artificial intelligence. Dr. Appleby is the 2023 and 2024 chair of ACVR, ECVDI Education and Development Committee. Ryan, welcome to the show. Thank you for finding the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. First time, long time, as they say.
So, immediately a question. So, you go to school for a long time, you go to vet school for a longer time, you do residency, become a radiologist, and you build educational platform. How, why do you pivot?
I think I don't so much see it as a pivot as an extension of all of those pieces. So throughout my educational journey, and the type of learning that I was always drawn to was educational segments that were short and manageable. And I think that is fairly indicated in some of the literature out there, the pedagogy of teaching and learning for folks, that our focus segments are shorter and we're able to retain a little bit more when we're learning in smaller chunks. And so when it came time to develop my own educational content for my students and start to think about delivering educational materials through continuing education, I was really passionate about the idea of doing it through a micro learning format. So creating these bite-sized chunks, less than 10-minute lessons that whomever is digesting it can do it at their own time and at their own pace and really fit it into their schedule. And so for me, it's not necessarily a pivot, but an extension of all of the work I do leading up to that.
That's awesome, Ryan. So we chatted lots in the last couple of weeks and months, but I knew about this idea of micro learning, and it's hilarious because I think we kind of stumbled upon it here at the podcast. We're very intentional about the length of our episodes because we want to make them digestible and easy to kind of get through. So, can you tell us more about that? So, why the focus on micro learning? I mean, obviously, you've gravitated towards that yourself, but what's the research behind it and why does it work better for some of us at least?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that last point is a great one. So it is for some of us or for a lot of us. But the nice thing about microlearning is that it's modular. So even if it's not for you, you can always stack things together and learn in a longer period. The literature, there's not been a lot done in veterinary medicine, unfortunately. And that's something that I think is a bit regrettable. It's always challenging to investigate a whole host of things in vet med. But across other professions, and especially in the health professions, there are other papers and reviews that have looked at the effect of microlearning on learner retention. And what they've found is that knowledge retention is greater when folks are offered education in a shorter segment, and they're able to tackle one topic at a time.
So, when you're teaching, but I understand consumption of the content on, at your own pace. Do you believe in that during the classroom setting as well? Are you like really chunking it into smaller pieces, and is it the breaks in between, or is it change of topic? Like, how does that change with the kind of regular, old school academic setting?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple pieces there. So I am limited in my day job at the Ontario Veterinary College by the structure of the curriculum. And the changes that are made there are more global and affect the entire curriculum. There's a lot involved in that, including, unions that support the faculty and things like that, and direct types of teaching that can be done or can be directed to teachers to be done, faculty to be done. So when I am teaching at OVC, I still deliver long form lecture content and labs. And what I end up doing is a combination of things. I either use the microlearning content as sort of a flipped classroom model. So asking students to review that ahead of time, and then come into class prepared, review similar content, or sometimes even the same content in a slightly different way, and have a more engaging session. Or what I've really seen and what students have kind of informed me through their feedback that they really appreciate is the opportunity to learn in the classroom setting. And then when it comes time for them to study for their exam, they want to go back and watch those individual chunks. And that's the same way that, we intend OB to work for veterinarians. So every veterinarian needs to complete their CE. There's things that they need to do. And everybody has sort of a different requirement depending on their state or province that they're in. But what we want to do is make sure that they're able to do that in a manageable segment and then return to the content whenever they need it on the clinic floor. So ideally, if somebody's interested in looking at information on congestive heart failure, or they're looking at radiographs in the clinic floor, maybe they've taken my thoracic radiograph course, they want to know if this case fits with heart failure, they can refer back to the lesson on left-sided cardiomegaly or heart failure specifically and see how that might compare. That's only going to take them, 2 to 5 minutes to do instead of maybe buffering through a longer lesson that's recorded or things like that. And they're able to access that in real time. And then on top of that, we've heard some really great feedback from veterinarians, especially those with families who find it really challenging to sit down at 7, 8 o'clock at night and go through a whole webinar. You get the kids to bed, and that's probably the last thing that you want to do is sit down for an hour and learn in the middle of your week. And unfortunately, I think that most CE providers online, that's kind of what there is, right? It's either recorded long form, and then you have to chunk it up yourself, or it's live and it's offered as a single hour, and you got to be committed for that hour. And instead, what we offer is a learn at your own pace environment that still has race approval for a majority of our content, and it's able to be accessed when folks need it and how they want it.
Yeah, it's so cool, Ryan. I mean, it makes me think of a comment that I got from somebody that one of my talks. I gave 3 talks this week at AVMA, and somebody came up to me after my interactive lab where the talk started with introduce yourself to the person sitting beside you on both sides. And then we got in and started to play with some of this artificial intelligence, and the room got really loud. And I had several people come up to me over the course of the next couple of days and said, this was one of the most interesting courses that I've been to at a vet conference in a really long time because it was so interactive. It was so different from everything that they had ingested kind of that morning or the days previous. And so, what does the future of education look like? Micro learning's interesting. You've been in school a very long time. You've taken a keen interest to help educate people. What changes are happening, and what impacts does that have on what you're trying to do with your company?
That's a great question. So I think for me, microlearning is a part of it for sure. I think there's a lot of other interesting technologies and educational techniques that we can employ in vet med that have been looked at elsewhere in other industries as well. So we've experimented a little bit with gamification as well. So adding in some gamified aspects to the way in which people learn. And I think that can be a huge way to retain users, or I guess rather retain information and have your users have a more positive experience. But then, of course, you sort of alluded to it a little bit there. There's obviously the artificial intelligence piece that is looming over every industry. And so I honestly don't know exactly how AI is going to make its true foothold in veterinary education. But I think that it's something that veterinary educators really need to be on top of and begin to explore. And so we're interested in how AI can be leveraged for educational matters at OBI. One of the things we do is summarize papers with AI tools and send those out in the form of a newsletter. So I do that for radiology specifically, and I send that out to a good chunk of the radiology community. And that's one way in which we can think about AI impacting education, taking the massive amounts of information, helping synthesize that and bring that together. But of course, then there's a ton of other tools. And that kind of, I guess, translates to some of my work at OVC, where we're looking at some of the applications of AI and starting to think about how can we use these for educational purposes. And we're still really in the early stages of that. And I can't say much more than I think it's a really important piece to be exploring, but I don't know exactly where it's all headed. And I think it's going to play a huge part of the way in which people are learning 5 or 10 years from now.
I keep thinking about how kids are consuming content these days. Like there's nothing but the shorts and reels, and like there's no attention span. I can't catch neither one of my kids watching a full on movie or cartoon. There's just no attention. So like it's just not the way that I think people will be consuming information in general. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you, and this is again, this kind of my own hypothesis, and I don't know if you've seen it ever incorporated into education, but I was always interested in this. There's a lot to say about you're learning more when you're teaching others. And I found that a lot during so radiology was the scariest thing for me. I didn't like it because I could not understand x-rays. So I took the approach of actually building a platform where in Russia, before they became nuts, we were working with the veterinary students, and I was a student, they were students, but I was posting x-rays from the classes, and then I was describing what's on them to them. I made like quizzes, but that's what made me to learn about radiology and to love it. I actually wanted to become a radiologist after vet school because how much I realized that I understand it now after trying to teach others. Have you seen anything like that? Is that something to consider in the educational setting where it's like incorporating students, teaching other students or something like that?
Yeah, I definitely think that's an interesting concept. I admit that I probably don't do as much of that as maybe I could or should. Certainly, there's aspects of that in group learning in school. In our labs, we break down into groups. We look at a series of cases, and the students work through those together. And oftentimes, there's some amount of teaching going on there where folks are kind of engaging with one another and starting to offer some perspectives from their own side. In terms of CE or maybe lifelong learning, I think there's great opportunity for that. And we see some of that in some of the online communities that exist, right? If you look at the Facebook communities or the other communities that are out there, or really essentially Vin, right? Like these are things that have been around for a really long time, and these forum type situations, people are always kind of asking for the thoughts of the hive, so to speak, and they want the explanation from other people. I think the challenge, of course, there is finding the balance between the group thought and the expertise and ensuring that, if you're kind of weighing in there, that we're directing our colleagues in the right direction. And I think there's a lot of room for the conversation to happen, but it's something to just, be cognizant of and be aware of through that process.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So let's go back to your company a little bit. I feel like we went off into the weeds, which we often do. But what does it look like and who's it meant for? Who's your ideal customer? And, there might be many of them listening. So let's tell them a little bit about who it's meant for and what they can get out of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So Obi is an online community for any veterinary professional, veterinarians, veterinary technicians, veterinary students to come and learn with a focus on bite-sized content. And so folks can sign up for free at obvet.com. You are taken to what I think is a really beautiful website designed by my co-founder. We didn't want it to look like, the internet of yore. We really wanted to have a smooth look and feel. It's mobile accessible, so you can kind of take it with you wherever you go. And a majority of the content is video based lessons within different courses. So we have some free courses, which are my own thoracic radiology course, which is 4 hours of content, is free for anybody. So you can kind of try microlearning and see what that's like if it's for you. And then we have a series of other courses. We have some really popular dentistry courses. We have courses in neurology, oncology, ophthalmology, endocrinology, as well as some courses in tick-borne diseases. And so there's a lot of really great stuff out there, and we're continuing to grow our course library. Every month or every couple months, we're putting out something new. Folks can either choose a la carte and add something to their course library that they're interested in based on those individual topics, or get a full membership to the site and have a year-long access to any of the information that's on there. And a large portion of what we have up there is race approved. And so is, depending on your area of practice, it would be allowable for inclusion in your yearly CE audits or budgets or whatever you might call it.
So, what's the big dream? So, you're an entrepreneur. 5 years down the road, everything works the way you envisioned it. What that vision is like.
Yeah, I think for us, it's really just educating as many veterinarians as we can, and helping to support better pet health through that education. And so we'd love to be, in the pocket of a large number or a majority of veterinarians as an option for them to get their learning. There's a ton of great options out there. I think that with our short form content, we offer something that's different than everyone else and creates, a really good opportunity for folks to learn in a different way. And so we'd like to just be able to offer educational content across every topic to veterinarians all over the world.
So, the other question that I have about your content and whether there's that application, or maybe I'm suggesting you a new niche to tap into. So where I find I'm interested in continuous education, many moons after I graduated and now kind of feel like a dinosaur, I turn to content a lot. If I have something that I haven't done in a while and I want to not, get my 30 hours for the next 2 years of CE, but actually as the sort of pocketbook of, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? Or what does that look like? Because I haven't seen it. Is this good for that? Is there an application of that where I can just kind of grab and be like, okay, well, I haven't seen this problem before. Is that another sort of persona for your market of kind of who can access it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, our content is for any veterinarian, and that we had initially anticipated it would a lot of the time focus on a younger veterinary segment who maybe want to get some of that information right after graduating. But what we found over the last couple of years of having the company is that this really is applicable for everyone. And so, folks who want to come back and review a topic that they haven't seen in a while, or that they might just want a refresher in the most up to date aspect, they're coming in and picking those individual segments out. And of course, then students shortly after graduation, so recent grad veterinarians, are also reaching for the same content just to bolster their knowledge as they're gaining confidence in practice. So absolutely, that's a part of this. So a good example of that might be if you haven't seen, certain neurologic diseases in quite some time and you're presented with one. We have a course on neurology where Dr. Barker goes through and runs through, some really key concepts in complex neurologic diseases, but really distills it into simple forms and helps folks get to the point where they're comfortable using different epileptic drugs or diagnosing different types of neurologic disease in practice. So that might be one example of something that you might be looking for.
Nice. What about AI learning, Ryan? You got any AI learning in your platform yet for vets that want to learn more about this crazy world?
Yeah, so AI education is something that I am incredibly passionate about. It's something that I've been working on for quite some time now, putting together some courses on AI. So that is definitely coming in the near future for OB. Based on my work in my research as well as my work with the ACVR, that's something that I'm really interested in, and I want people to understand a little bit more about all types of AI, both the generative AI, the large language models, but then of course the diagnostic AI systems. And that's going to be a real focus on what we talk about in our course, is really understanding some of the distinctions there, and ways we need to think about that and consider different things for different types of AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a session with a friend of yours, Ryan King, yesterday, and the Veterinary Innovation Council is looking to do some of that education as well. So that might be a good connect for you. Listen, we've chewed through all the time. We always do. We get a couple questions to wrap up, but really interesting. And I'm going to throw a third question in. If people want to learn more information, where do they find you guys? How do they get to the platform? And then the next one right after that is a book, a YouTube video, a TED Talk, something you would like to recommend to our guests.
Yeah, so you can find us at obvet.com, obivet.com, and you can make a free account there. It's free to start. And again, our thoracic radiology course is free. The book that I would recommend, and I just finished this recently, is called The Undoing Project by Michael Lewis. And this is something that I really highly recommend to any medical professional, veterinary medical professional. It's about these philosophers who kind of looked at different types of bias. And as far as kind of Michael Lewis makes it sound, is that laid some of the foundation for the evidence-based medicine frameworks that kind of came into play. And so I really think that this book got me really thinking critically about different aspects of my own, veterinary practice, and I highly recommended it too.
And the second question, or I guess the third one in these three that John asked, is there another innovator in the industry that you would like to invite to this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Steve Jocelyn is another radiologist and has a company called Veti. They're in Australia and they're doing some really cool, interesting stuff. I highly recommend that you chat with them.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.